Hello and welcome back to the Pool Builders vlog and podcast. For those of you just joining us and this is your first time tuning in, I'm Randy Reardon, owner of Integrity Pool Builders, and I'm joined today by Mason Davis, our general manager.
Hello.
One topic we get asked a lot of questions about, especially this time of year as the weather starts to change, is plastering pools. You know, building pools in Denver, Colorado is a lot different than a lot of other climates, primarily because of our climate. Yeah. And we get asked a lot, you know, hey, when's my pool gonna be done? When can we plaster? And when does plaster season start and stop? And these are all very good questions. And since I don't have a glass ball, I can't tell you exactly, but what we're gonna go over today in this video is the guidelines in order to be able to plaster and industry's best recommended practices and kind of what we've adopted here at Integrity Pool Builders. All right, Mason, why don't you start us off here?
Yeah, the first thing we want to consider when we're talking about weather for plastering is just going to be shell temperatures. So we don't want to apply the plaster to anything, any shell temperature that's below 50, 55 degrees. And that's per the manufacturer's guidelines. There's the restrictions on it. There's also restrictions if things are too warm, which don't come into play in our climate. We worry about the lows.
Not too often.
But that's what we're looking for. And that can be, you know, there is a correlation with ambient air temperatures, but it's not direct. While we might see, you know, if we're getting lower temperatures during the nighttime, we could still have very high temperatures during the day that help keep the shell warmer. So while we keep an eye out for that, and that can give us some indicators on where the plaster season's sort of trending, we want to make sure we're getting good measurements from our actual shell temperatures in the morning, and that can help dictate where things are trending. So when we show up to plaster, the first thing our guys do is shoot shell temperatures that morning. It's one, to document we have shell temperatures, and two, to also provide us some information on where things are trending so we can know when the season's ending.
Part of turning out a good plaster and an interior finish for a pool isn't just having good quality finishers. It's having a proper finish, knowing how to apply it, and knowing how to adapt things as temperatures change. And shooting those temperatures and knowing what we're dealing with really not only helps, but it sets the standard to ensure that things get done properly. Yep. So it's not just a 75 degree temp like, hey, it hit 75 degrees today, why isn't my pool being plastered? That's not it. I mean, the day might start out at 30 degrees.
Yeah, and slowly ramp up to 75 and by noon, and at that point we can't start plastering.
Correct, yeah. And part of why we need that 50 to 55 degree range, not only for the material itself, but for the substrate or the pool shell that we're applying it to, is the endothermic process of plaster hardening, not curing, but hardening, needs a certain temperature for it to react quickly. You know, flat workers can finish all the way down to about 45 degrees. This is a lot different. You know, we're plastering vertically onto a wall, you know, about a ½ inch thick, and it has to harden in a certain time frame and in a certain fashion where we finish as we're troweling, it finishes out evenly and we can get even distribution of the materials that are inside the plaster that we later expose to, you know, show the finish of the plaster. So most of our plasters are, you know, colored, exposed aggregate finishes. And if one wall is much colder than the other, because, you know, it gets sun and the other one doesn't, and it's right around that 50 degree mark, and one wall is colder than 50 and one is over, you're going to get a different look to your plaster.
Yeah, they're going to be sitting there troweling it for a lot longer, trying to get it set up, and that's going to have inconsistencies in the mix.
Because the more you trowel, the more you push the larger aggregate behind. Now, troweling and compaction of the material is very good, but the more you trowel, the more Portland material comes out to the surface. Yeah. And then, you know, less of that exposure happens in those areas. So we found, we go with the 55 degree mark. We strive for that is our target. We don't necessarily always hit that, but if we strive for 55 and we're at 50, we're good and we can turn out a good quality product. Which brings us to our next thing. So like right now, you know, yesterday was what, 76 degrees?
Yeah, it's pretty warm, mid 70s.
Today I think is low 70s?
Low 70s, but what we got into overnight was some near freezing temperatures.
Darn near freezing temperatures. So our plaster today, tinted and we heated. even tenant and heating, we showed up today and some shell temps were slightly below 50, so we had to run the heater, torch the shell a little bit, get things warm before we even put the plaster on.
I think they were doing that for about an hour before they were able to mix, which was about the time where we were getting ready to call it if they couldn't get temperatures.
Correct.
Out, because there's only so much time you can delay. But
at those lower temperatures, plaster takes longer to set up and harden. So it allows us, a certain window to be able to work during the day. Again, the sun's going down at a few minutes before 6 o'clock right now. So we kind of have a narrow window to be able to get things done. Let's talk about springtime. What happened this spring, Mason?
Well, we had a really delayed start to our plaster season, kind of working in the reverse order of this fall where temperatures are slowly going down. Last year, spring, temperatures were slowly going up to where we did not see shell temperatures without a tent at that 50-55 degree mark until the first week of June, which was coincidentally the first time we plastered a pool not underneath a tent, and that had some drastic implications to our plaster schedule.
Our plaster season this year ran very, very long because of that. So if you guys are watching this video or thinking about building a pool, or you're in the pool building process, guys, get as much rough work, excavation, plumbing, steel, shotcrete,
getting through coping this time of year is huge.
Get done what you can so that we can pick and choose good weather for plastering. While we can, plaster under a tent, it's best if we don't have to. And there is a time where it's too cold to even plaster under a tent. If our plaster rig shows up in the morning and the material drops below that 50 degree mark, it's not good. So typically when things are freezing and in the low 40s for an extended amount of time till late morning, even plastering with a tent is kind of out of the question.
Yeah, there's still parameters that we need to meet even with inducing those temperatures for the shell. There's still that ambient air temperatures outside while we're mixing and transporting the material that plays a big factor as well.
Yeah, because the material still has to be on a truck to drive from our covered warehouse where it's heated here to the job site, and then it gets mixed outside. Additionally, our water that we use to mix with this time of year starts to drop in temperature too. A lot of people really don't think about that. So it goes from, in the summertime, that 65 degree mark to below 50 here shortly. So when that starts to happen, if we don't have warm plaster bags and it's cold outside, it's just a non-start. Of course, there's always ways to overcome things. Anything can be done with enough time and enough money, but when you're building, a $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 pool, those costs associated with plastering off season really add up.
Yeah, it's an important note you made, just come out the grand scheme of the cost of these projects, right? And making sure things are done right in the correct manner at all stages, but especially the one you're going to see the most. The plaster's visually what pops out the most, what you're feeling most of the time. You want that investment that you've made in that plaster to last a long time. So it's really important to make sure it's done right. There's some builders that may push the envelope on trying to get things done in the name of, at the end of the day, making the client happy. But pushing the time frame to cut things short could lead to premature plaster failures through delamination, through cracking, discoloration, as you highlighted earlier. So it's really important to protect your investment and just be patient to make sure it's done properly. That way you're not running into those issues of having to replaster, 3-4 years down the line like we've seen instead of, 10 to 12.
Yeah, there's having a shorter schedule and the negative implications thereof far outweigh doing it properly and waiting.
Right.
Far outweigh it. There's nothing worse than having, a beautiful pool turn out and there be check cracks and plaster delamination. And we actually have a refurbish that we're starting here shortly that we'll be plastering this spring that was replastered earlier this year before Memorial Day by another company and just did not turn out well.
Yeah, back-to-back years of having to deal with this hassle, whereas if it, could just theoretically waited a few more weeks and been enjoying it this next spring instead of having to, do the whole thing over again.
Correct. All right, well, thank you, Mason. Really appreciate your insight and knowledge on this. Guys, as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to call or email us here at Integrity Pool Builders. We really do appreciate you joining in and listening to us.